Have you ever walked away from someone and they didn't even flinch? No tears, no messages, no sign that your absence mattered at all. In fact, it almost felt like they were relieved you were gone. But here's the part nobody tells you. Sometimes the moment she seems the least affected is actually the beginning of the moment that slowly starts to haunt her. When you first walked away, it looked like she didn't care. She might have acted calm, confident, maybe even a little cold to you. It felt like everything you invested, your time, your loyalty, your attention, meant absolutely nothing. And that silence can hit harder than rejection itself because when someone shows no reaction, it makes you question your value. It makes you wonder if you're ever important at all. But what most men don't realize is that in many situations, what you saw wasn't indifference, it was certainty. At that moment, she still believed she had the upper hand. She believed the emotional connection was still under her control. In her mind, you leaving didn't feel permanent. It felt temporary. She assumed that eventually you would miss her, reach out, or come back the way you always had before. Think about how people treat something they believe they can always have. They take it lightly. They don't feel urgency. They don't feel fear of loss. When someone believes you're still emotionally attached, your physical absence doesn't register as a real consequence. To her, you weren't truly gone. You were simply taking a break before returning to the same dynamic. This is why she seemed calm, not because you had no value, but because she believed your presence was still guaranteed. In her mind, the story wasn't over yet. She thought the chapter would eventually loop back to the same place it always did, with you reaching out again, trying to reconnect, trying to win her attention. And many men unknowingly reinforce that belief. They leave, but a few days later they send a message. They check her stories, they react to posts, they find subtle ways to remind her they're still emotionally available. From the outside, it looks like distance, but psychologically, the attachment is still there. And as long as that attachment is visible, she never truly feels the weight of losing you. But the moment you actually step back, not just physically, but emotionally, something begins to shift. The silence becomes real. The certainty she wants it starts to weaken. The space you leave behind stops feeling temporary and starts feeling unfamiliar. At first, she may not notice it, but time has a strange way of revealing the things people once took for granted. And that's when the story quietly begins to change. The moment you truly detach is the moment the entire dynamic begins to change. Not the kind of detachment where you say you're done, but still secretly hope she notices. Not the kind where you walk away but keep checking your phone every hour waiting for a message. Real detachment is different. It's quiet, it's calm, and most importantly, it's genuine. Many men think they've walked away when in reality they've only created distance. They stop talking for a few days, maybe a week, but emotionally they're still right there. They're still watching her life through social media. They're still wondering who she's talking to, what she's doing, and whether she's thinking about them. And the strange thing about human psychology is that people can feel that invisible thread of attention. When a man is still emotionally invested in the background, she senses it. Even without direct contact, the energy of availability is still there. She may not consciously think about it, but deep down, she knows you haven't truly left. And because of that, there's no urgency for her to question the situation. But when a man reaches a point where he genuinely lets go of the need for her attention, something very different begins to happen. His focus shifts. Instead of watching her life, he begins rebuilding his own. His days stop revolving around memories, conversations, or possibilities with her. He starts investing his energy back into himself, his work, his growth, his goals, his friendships, and the things that give his life direction. And this kind of shift is powerful because it's not something you have to announce. You don't need to post about it, prove it, or explain it. Real detachment speaks through absence, the absence of chasing, the absence of emotional reactions, the absence of constant presence in her world. At first, she might not notice it immediately. Life continues as normal. The routine of her world keeps moving. But over time, the space you leave behind begins to feel different. The attention she once received from you so easily is no longer there. The emotional reassurance she once had in the background slowly fades away. Human beings are naturally sensitive to changes in patterns. When someone who used to be consistently present suddenly becomes distant, not out of anger or drama, but quiet independence, it creates curiosity. The mind begins asking questions it didn't ask before. Where did he go? What is he doing? Why isn't he reacting the way he used to? And the more genuine your detachment becomes, the stronger that curiosity grows. Because when someone stops chasing, it removes the predictable structure of the relationship dynamic. The person who once felt certain about your attention now faces something unfamiliar, uncertainty. This is where psychological tension begins to form. Not because you tried to create it, but because your absence now has meaning. Your silence is no longer temporary noise, it becomes a signal that something has changed inside you. And when someone starts to feel that they may no longer have the same emotional influence over you, the mind begins to pay attention in a way it never did before. Because true detachment doesn't chase attention, it quietly redefines your value. At some point, something subtle begins to change inside her mind. It doesn't happen overnight, and it rarely appears in a dramatic moment. Instead, it creeps in quietly. A small thought here, a passing curiosity there, because the thing that once felt certain suddenly doesn't feel so certain anymore. For a long time, she believed she understood the dynamic between you. She believed she knew how the story would play out. In her mind, you were predictable. No matter how much distance appeared between you, there was always an unspoken belief that eventually you would circle back. Maybe not immediately, but eventually that belief gave her a sense of emotional security. It allowed her to treat the connection lightly because she assumed it would always be available. But when time starts to pass and that pattern doesn't return, something inside the mind begins to question what it once believed. Humans rely heavily on certainty. We feel comfortable when we believe we understand the behavior of the people around us. When someone acts in a way that matches our expectations, it keeps the emotional environment stable. The moment those expectations break, the mind pays attention. At first, it might just be a small observation. She realizes you haven't reached out. Days turn into weeks. Weeks turn into longer stretches of silence. The man who once reacted quickly, who once made his presence known, suddenly feels distant in a way that can't be easily explained. And this is where psychological tension begins to build because now the mind starts filling in the blanks. When certainty disappears, imagination takes its place. She might begin wondering what you're doing. She might start thinking about whether you've moved on, whether you've met someone new, or whether your life has taken a direction she didn't expect. Curiosity is a powerful force. The more unanswered questions there are, the more attention the mind gives to the situation. Something that once felt unimportant slowly becomes interesting, not because you try to prove anything, but because the predictable pattern she relied on has disappeared. The strange thing about human psychology is that we often notice the value of something only after its certainty is removed. When something is always available, the mind treats it casually. But when access becomes uncertain, attention increases. What once felt ordinary begins to feel significant. This is the moment when the emotional shock begins to form. The realization that the dynamic may not be the same anymore starts to sink in. The man she once believed would always remain within reach is now someone she can't easily read. And that uncertainty creates a quiet pressure inside the mind, not loud enough to show immediately, but strong enough to slowly reshape the way she thinks about the past. Because once certainty disappears, the question that eventually begins to surface is simple: what if she misjudged you? As more time passes, something deeper begins to unfold inside the human mind. Regret rarely appears the moment a connection ends. In fact, most people feel very little at the beginning. When emotions are fresh and the situation feels under control, the mind stays focused on the present. There are distractions, new conversations, new routines, and the belief that nothing truly valuable has been lost. But regret doesn't live in the moment. Regret grows in the space that silence creates. When someone no longer has easy access to you, your attention, your energy, your presence, the brain begins to process things differently. Without the constant interaction that once existed, the mind slowly turns inward. And when that happens, memories start to surface. It's rarely the dramatic moments that come back first. Instead, it's the quiet ones, the small things that once felt ordinary, the conversations that seemed routine, the way you showed up consistently, the stability you brought into her world without demanding recognition for it. At the time, those things may not have seemed significant. When someone is constantly present, their effort blends into the background of everyday life. People adapt to consistency so quickly that they stop noticing it. It becomes part of the normal rhythm of their environment. But once that rhythm disappears, the absence becomes noticeable. Suddenly, the attention that used to arrive naturally is gone. The person who once listened, supported, and showed up is no longer part of the daily picture. And when that absence stretches long enough, the mind begins comparing the present moment with the past. This is where regret quietly begins to grow. Not because you try to make someone regret losing you, but because the human brain automatically reevaluates past experiences when something meaningful is no longer accessible. The memories that once felt ordinary now carry a different weight. What seemed easy to replace suddenly feels rare. And with that realization comes a different emotional perspective. She may start thinking about the times you showed patience, the effort you invested when things weren't perfect, the way you cared in ways that didn't always receive appreciation at the time. It's important to understand that regret doesn't arrive as a loud confession. Most of the time, it stays hidden inside thoughts. It appears during quiet moments when the mind has nothing else to distract it. A memory here, a realization there, slowly connecting pieces that didn't seem important before. And the more distance there is between the present and the past, the clearer those pieces become. Because once someone loses direct access to something that once brought stability and emotional energy into their life, the mind begins asking a difficult question. Did they let something valuable slip away? While all of this is slowly unfolding in her mind, something else important is happening in your life. The time and energy that once revolved around the relationship is no longer being spent the same way. Instead of replaying old conversations or wondering what she's thinking, your attention begins shifting towards something far more powerful, your own growth. At first, this shift might feel uncomfortable. When a relationship ends or when someone you cared about walks out of your life, the natural reaction is to focus on the loss. Most people spend weeks or even months thinking about what went wrong, what they could have said differently, or how things might have turned out if certain moments had played out another way. That kind of thinking keeps a person emotionally tied to the past, but the moment you decide to redirect that energy into improving yourself, everything begins to change. Your focus moves away from trying to understand someone else's decisions and starts moving toward building a stronger version of yourself. Your routines become more intentional. If you invest more effort into your work, your goals, your physical health, your knowledge, and the direction you want your life to move. And here's the powerful part about this transformation: it doesn't need an audience. Real growth doesn't happen for the purpose of proving something to someone who doubted you. It happens because you recognize that your life has a bigger purpose than chasing someone's approval. When a man reaches that understanding, his mindset begins to evolve in ways that people around him can eventually notice. Confidence that comes from genuine self improvement feels different from the confidence people try to perform. It's quieter, it's calmer. It's not built on trying to impress anyone. It's built on knowing that your life is moving forward with or without someone else's validation. And when someone who once knew you begins to see that change, even from a distance, it can create a powerful shift in perception. The version of you she once understood no longer seems the same. The man who once gave all his attention to the relationship now appears focused, disciplined, and emotionally independent. That kind of transformation can be difficult for someone to process if they assumed your life would stay the same after you left. When people underestimate someone, they often expect that person to remain stuck in the same place. They expect the same reactions, the same emotional patterns, the same behavior. But when you grow beyond that version of yourself, the narrative changes. The man she thought she understood becomes someone unfamiliar, someone she can't easily categorize or predict anymore. And that uncertainty can create a new kind of curiosity, not because you tried to create it, but because your growth quietly proved that losing you didn't stop your story. It simply forced you to become someone stronger. By the time you reach this point, the entire situation begins to look different than it did in the beginning. What once felt like rejection, confusion, or even personal failure slowly reveals a deeper lesson. Because the real power in this story was never about making someone regret losing you. The real power was always about discovering your own value. Too many men spend years trying to earn appreciation from someone who never truly recognized it in the first place. They give their attention, their loyalty, their patience, and their effort, hoping that eventually the other person will see what they bring to the table. And when that appreciation doesn't come, it creates frustration and self doubt. It feels like the harder you try, the less you're seen. But the truth is, value doesn't grow from chasing validation. In fact, the more someone chases approval, the more they unintentionally lower their own perceived worth. When your entire focus becomes proving yourself to someone else, you slowly give away the one thing that makes a person naturally attractive: self respect. Self respect changes the way a man moves through the world. It changes the way he handles rejection, the way he reacts to distance, and the way he treats his own time and energy. A man who respects himself doesn't beg for attention, and he doesn't fight to stay in situations where his presence isn't valued. Instead, he steps back, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of clarity, because he understands something that many people learn far too late in life. The right people don't need to be convinced of your worth. They recognize it naturally through your actions, your character, and the way you carry yourself.
Yeah.
And when you reach that mindset, your focus shifts permanently. Instead of trying to hold on to someone who may or may not appreciate you, you begin building a life that stands strong on its own. Your goals become clearer, your standards become stronger, your energy becomes more selective. Ironically, this is often the moment when people from the past begin to look at you differently. Not because you tried to prove something, but because the man who once chased their attention no longer exists. In his place stands someone who is focused, independent, and comfortable moving forward without needing anyone's permission. That kind of presence has a quiet gravity to it. People notice it even when you're not trying to be noticed, but by by the time you reach that point, something else has changed inside you as well. The need for their recognition is no longer the goal. Your life is no longer built around whether someone regrets losing you or not, because the greatest shift happens when you realize that your value was never meant to be chased. It was meant to be lived.